Hello, book lovers, and welcome to another episode of Authors Love Bookstores from a Mighty Blaze. I'm your host, Joe Moldover, author of the novel Every Moment After, and I am so happy to be back here with you today. For over 90 episodes, I've traveled across the United States, Canada, and Great Britain along with my partner and fellow writer, Kimberly Hensel-Lawrence, to support independent booksellers and the authors who love them. And today, we are landing in St. Paul, Minnesota with Subtext Books, and I'm delighted to welcome bookseller Sarah Cassavant to the program. Hello, Sarah.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here today. And we are here with author Andrew DeYoung. Andrew, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Absolutely. For the audience, Andrew DeYoung is an author who lives in Minnesota. His first novel, The XO Project, won a Minnesota Book Award in 2018. And his second novel and adult fiction debut, The Temps, was published last week. So we're going to be talking all about that. Yeah, everybody hold up their coffee. There you go. Come on.
Get in on it. Yeah.
Very nice. Published last week. So congratulations. Andrew also has a monthly newsletter where he writes about books, TV, movies, culture, and writing. We'll be talking about that a little bit. And Andrew, we're so delighted to have you here. And we're going to come to you with the first question. We are here with Subtext because you named them as your beloved local indie. What's so great about them? What do you love about Subtext Books?
So many things. And I mean, here in St. Paul and Minneapolis, we do have an embarrassment of riches when it comes to local bookstores. But I ultimately picked Subtext because I'm from St. Paul and they're a St. Paul store. So part of it's St. Paul pride, which is very important when you have two cities. You got to have a little bit of loyalty. The other one is that it's just a great place to walk into. Whenever I walk in, I'm immediately struck by, it's not huge, but they've used the space so well and so carefully curated, carefully and smartly curated their selection. I can confidently say that when I go in and I look at their tables and I look at their face outs, almost everything there is something that I want to read. And that is, I think, really speaks to the amazing taste of the booksellers there and the books that they select. And if you're overwhelmed by choices, as I often am, they're very well read and they will point you to something that they think you're going to love. So, I mean, I think that that's what's great about all independent booksellers, but Subtext is just uncommonly very, very good at it.
Fabulous. I love it. It makes me want to be there. Sarah, I know that you had the opportunity to host Andrew's launch last week. Tell us a little bit about what's going on at Subtext. You guys are open, you're hosting live events. How are things going?
Yeah, well, things are going really well. We're open for browsing. We have been since summer 2020. Time feels like a weird spiral, and it's hard to say when exactly that was, but we've been open for a long time again for browsing. We are slowly getting into more doing in-person events. We are doing all virtual events throughout the pandemic over Crowdcast, but I'm trying to get more into the in-person events. So Andrew's event was actually one of our first in-person events after the 2 years, which was really exciting and really fun. I tried to capture the spirit of an in-person event with a virtual event, but there's something so special with actually being in the same room with people and just seeing that connection, that human connection. So I'm excited to get back to that this spring and summer.
The energy is just so great. I feel like this past month I've been doing nothing but going to book events and concerts and every live event I can possibly go to kind of refill. Sarah, in just a few moments, I'm going to be asking you about live events because I'm always curious about booksellers' memory of memorable live events that were maybe especially interesting, funny, bizarre, surprising, terrifying. So I'll let you ruminate on that for a second. But Andrew, I want to come to you first because again, congratulations. The Temps is out in the world. To the audience, you can pick up your copy at Subtext. We are dropping the links in the chat. Sarah, I believe you said there are some signed copies available. Is that true?
Yes, there are.
Awesome. So head on over. For people who haven't had a chance to pick it up yet, Andrew, I wondered if you would just tell us a little bit about the book. And I will just maybe open that up with just sort of an observation about it, because I did get a chance to get an ARC and to read it in advance, which was fabulous, and I loved it. And then when I was sort of prepping for this interview, I read a comment that you had made about how you like to sort of mash things together,
Hmm.
juxtapose things, and put things side by side that you might not expect to go side by side. And that had been exactly what I'd been thinking about when I read your book. I mean, I don't want to give sort of it's hard. I don't want to do spoilers, but um, I say that the book juxtaposes is an apocalyptic book. It juxtaposes things that are genuinely quite scary
Hmm.
and horrifying and etc. Um, with things that are really funny and satirical and sharply observed, and just that juxtaposition of horror and humor I think is fabulous. So sort of with that observation as a frame, I wonder if you would just tell us a bit about your book.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fantastic setup. Thank you. I mean, I think that it probably, just to situate the reader, it's a mashup in many ways of an apocalyptic thriller and an office comedy, with probably a bit of a lens of coming of age, of young adults making their way in the world. The basic premise is that a group of temps, office temps at a large mega corporation, mostly young people in their 20s, who've just gotten out of college and are trying to make their way into a career. Um, they become stranded at the office during a global apocalypse. They are not permanent employees. All the permanent employees have been invited to a meeting outside. They have to stay behind inside, and during the all company meeting, this sort of terrible event happens involving a poisonous gas, and the temps, the permanent employees die rather dramatically, as you say, somewhat traumatic. The temps are the ones who are kind of left inside, surviving. And as it kind of becomes clear that the event that they witnessed was not isolated, but it might be happening in different places around the world or even globally. Um, it might even be that they are the sole survivors of truly a global apocalypse event. So this kicks off, a kind of, I mean, part thriller, part comedy, because I think that there's something that's very funny about this notion of like young millennial Gen Z temp workers being the people to inherit the earth after an apocalypse. So as you say, both the horrifying and the humorous place side by side.
Absolutely. I don't think it's saying too much to say. Like I love that what determines whether you survive or not has to do with like the color of your corporate lanyard.
Yes, right.
Like, I just felt like that was just like perfect. And an interesting kind of inversion, because of course in I guess we've had several catastrophes recently, but in COVID, it was oftentimes the people with the jobs that sort of had the least status who were really on the front lines and the most exposed and in the most danger. And of course, in this apocalypse, it's sort of the people who were the lowest on the hierarchy, the temps, who paradoxically wound up being saved by their disinvitation. So I thought it was very clever and interesting.
Yeah, the irony of that was something that really appealed to me. And the detail that you mentioned about the color of your corporate lanyard, of your security badge, that's taken from life. I'm not sure if it's still this way, but I knew some contractors at a local corporation here in the Twin Cities, and they did have different color badges for contract workers and permanent workers, and it made a difference for which meetings you got invited to.
Oh yeah.
Which is, I mean, it's just a very strange thing when I heard that detail, but I guess it's that way probably on a lot of companies.
I remember caring deeply about my lanyard and exactly what it said and what time, I mean, all of that stuff. So I that totally rang true, and it's just one of those fabulous details. Um, so Sarah, so we had the event last week. I assume that a gas did not descend on Andrew's event and lead to apocalyptic behavior.
No, not that we know of, at least.
Not that we
Maybe
know.
we're all in the post-apocalypse.
Everybody left safely. Everybody
good.
arrived and left safely. Yes.
The mark of a good event.
Yes.
Sarah, tell us, what pops into your head? Live literary events that you've hosted, that you've been to. What sticks in your mind?
Well, luckily I don't have any horror stories. All of our authors and events are all very lovely. And I feel like the best events that I've hosted at the bookstore are when it's a big crowd, but everyone is just so enraptured by who's reading and who's talking. I'm thinking of a particular local poet reading that we had. And everyone was so present. Of course, people are shifting around often at events, and you can tell they're thinking about, is my meter up? What am I going to do for dinner after this? But in that moment, everyone was just so laser focused on these poets who were reading, and it was just a really beautiful moment.
Yeah.
Not to be too, woo about it, but I'm really excited to get back into that and try to curate more of those moments, because you just don't have that over virtual. But just, I think it's rare nowadays too to have a moment where everyone is just so together and present. If that answers your
No, I
question.
think it's a great response. I went to a poetry event on Monday, launch for a wonderful novel in verse called "The Most Dazzling Girl in Berlin," a YA novel by Kip Wilson. We can post to it in the chat for the store. And I just thinking how wonderful it was to be sitting there in a crowd listening to a poet, reading verse, and just sort of something we took for granted a couple of years ago, and now it's just just so fabulous. So that's great. I love that.
Yeah, Andrew, at your event on Thursday, we were at a bar, and it was just so nice to be laughing and drinking with fellow readers, and just being there in a community together was so nice.
I agree.
Totally.
Just being in contact with fellow book lovers, even outside of being me having been the author for the event, getting out and just seeing people who love books, I think is really life-giving.
Totally. So just a quick note for our audience, both current audience and people who are watching our video in future time. Just a reminder, the purpose of our program is to support independent booksellers. And today we are supporting SUBTEXT Books. So it is a free program, but if you are able, hop on there, click through. We're posting links to SUBTEXT throughout the program. Pick up a great book, obviously this one. But Kip Wilson's new book is fabulous. We're going to be dropping book recs later on, so keep an eye on the comments for subtext links. Andrew, in addition to this book, you published a really interesting piece in LitHub just about a week or so, I guess March 21st, a bit over a week ago. Great title. Every coming of age story is an apocalypse story. So true. And we'll post the link to it in the chat, because everybody should, it's there. Everybody should read it. But what draws you to that coming of age moment? Your first book was a YA novel. It has sort of a coming of age, growing up dimension to it. This is not, the Temps is not YA, but it is nonetheless about sort of young people and has sort of a coming of age dimension. What about that compels you?
Well, in part, I thought a lot about my own life, during this period of life that the characters are in. I'm in my 30s now, but all the characters are in their 20s. When I went through them, I had the notion, I should write about this someday, because it's just, for me, it was a very intense period of life. Not everybody, I think, has the, I'm in my 20s existential crisis, but a lot of people do, and I did. And it had a lot to do with work and what I wanted to do, and also what was going on in the world. There was war. The United States was involved in a war in Iraq when I was in my 20s. I had kind of a very dim view of what the future would look like. And I think that those things were connected. I didn't have much invested yet in the system as it was, because I didn't really have a job. I wasn't established. And I also, from my vantage point, everything looked really dark and apocalyptic. And those two things, I couldn't differentiate them. They all seemed the same to me. So my coming of age and my, quarter life crisis in my 20s felt apocalyptic. And so when it came time, I kind of aged out of it, but I always thought like I should write something about this. I just need I just need a premise that kind of brings it to life. And ultimately, I kind of came to this idea of young temp workers surviving an apocalypse, and it kind of brought it all together. So my like metaphorical feeling in my 20s that the world was ending, or that my world was ending, and also my anxieties in that time about work, and I just kind of wrote into that. I'm not sure if I'll continue um, to visit coming of age. Maybe I got it out of my system, or maybe I'll just keep coming back to it. I have to figure that out. But I just think it's a very thematically fruitful um, type of story, because there's obviously a change. You go from one state to another. There's innocence to experience, or moving into disillusionment, or whatever. Um, and also just a lot of like conflict with the past and the future. There's kind of a natural conflict in coming of age with like, what does the future look like? Because young people need to know what the future is going to look like, and conflict with prior generations who, I think that a lot of coming of age centers around young people feel like they're getting kind of a raw deal due to what prior generations have done. These are all things that come up in the book. So I mean, we'll see. It's at least been very fruitful for me for these two books, and maybe I'll come back to it, or maybe I'll move on to parenthood or marriage, or any of the like really adult things that I'm experiencing now.
Right, right. Mortgages and
Mortgages,
car
yeah,
payments.
right.
I mean, so much in there. I mean, there's so much in there that's just great stuff, and I think like you're tapping right into all of these rich themes in terms of that moment in life, and sort of capturing the quality of these people who have sort of like joined the adult world and can see it clearly, but don't have like the investment in it
Right.
that leads to the distortions and the cynicism that we kind of accumulate as we get older. There's this great moment in the book near the beginning of the book where one of the book has follows multiple characters through this experience, but where one of the characters shortly after this apocalyptic event is basically coming to terms with how like unprepared he is.
Yeah.
Like he's somebody who has this like liberal arts education, and he's kind of sorting through all these things that he knows and that he's experienced, and just kind of realizing that he's just unprepared for this moment, for survival, for sort of the quote real world. And I just, even though that's obviously a very specific experience he's having, I just think it captures what all of us feel in that moment in life. Like, oh my gosh, I'm not ready for this. Everything I've
Yeah.
done has not prepared me for this job, this relationship, this baby, this, whatever. It just, I don't know, it just rang so true.
Well, and I mean, it's obviously a very intense thing. I haven't had the experience of reflecting on my liberal arts education through like whether it prepared me to survive an apocalypse. But I did have the feeling, and still do sometimes, that my education, as much as I loved it and as much as it shaped who I am today, didn't really give me the things that I need to know day to day to get a job, to like cook my own food, like little things like that. And certainly like to survive, if it really came down to that. I don't know how to forage, I don't know how to hunt. Are those things that are going to be necessary? I'm not sure. I really don't hope so. But yeah, just the anxiety around what a liberal arts education is actually worth, especially becomes as it becomes more and more expensive, and we go
Yeah.
into greater and greater debt to get that education. It's just a real crisis for young people entering the world.
Yeah. No, you captured it, and you captured it in sort of a very unique, compelling way. So, Sarah, I want to come back to you because we're sort of talking coming of age. And I think to me, that's sort of one thing that segues us into is a conversation about genre. And I love to talk about genre with people who come on this show. A lot of the people who watch the show are themselves writers or aspiring writers who are trying to figure out what shelf they will go on, or they're trying to get on, or whatever. So, I just sort of want to ask you a little bit about sort of how genre shapes book selling, how you think about genre as a bookseller. And I guess since we're talking coming of age, and because Andrew's first book was YA, I would love to hear in particular how you think about YA versus sort of non-YA fiction with younger voices, with younger characters, with coming of age stories. What's the difference? How do you figure it out? Why does it matter?
Well, I think it's a really murky sort of area, right? I think that's why I have this conversation. What classifies a novel as YA when it could be shelved in, adult fiction? Is it the age of the character? Is it not? I feel like that's a question that we're all asking every day about specific books. I feel like as a bookseller, specifically with genres, I tend to read across genres, and I also really interested in books that aren't easily classified, which makes it hard to actually shelve them in the retail space. But I think it's more exciting, and there's a lot of cool work being done with, you know, is it memoir, is it fiction? But then, of course, around ages. I feel like I'm losing the thread of your question.
Oh,
But
There's no answer. There's no good answer. There
That's
really
a great
isn't.
answer.
yeah, there
Yeah.
really is no good answer. And of course, I mean, we have them separated just because that's, how we've organized it. But I think we're seeing a lot of, crossover between both sides. I think that's a really good thing to celebrate too. I don't think you have to stick with your genre that you're prescribed. I think it's good to read outside of those boundaries.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, that's a great. We had a bookseller on a few months ago who talked about reorganizing their shelves by color coding the volumes to try to kind of like shake people out of genre. And
that makes my Virgo heart hurt, but okay. Not to be alphabetized, but all right.
fair, totally fair. But I mean, I don't know. Do you think genre is limiting? I mean, do you think that people walk into bookstores and sort of like put on blinders so that they're missing, a ton of books that they would love because like, oh, I don't read sci-fi, I don't read fantasy, I don't read YA, or whatever. I mean, do you think that it sort of keeps people from finding, or keeps authors from finding their readers?
I think sometimes, I think it definitely does at first limit customers, but I think part of the joy of my job and booksellers everywhere is to, sort of gently guide customers around what normally stop them from picking up a book and being like, no, you'll like this, like give it a try, and just sort of introducing those other books that they might not immediately pick up because they think it's not for them, or I'm not going to read YA. I'm a 40-year-old woman, like I'm not doing that, but they'll really enjoy it, and it's just a book. So I think I mean, authors obviously want to have their book placed the best place that it should be, and that's what booksellers want to do for them as well. But I think that's where we come in as sort of like steering people towards what they're actually looking for, outside of the regimented box that they have to be put in for sales and retail
Yeah.
purposes.
Yeah.
So injecting more of that human quality into things.
Andrew, you hopped genres. You published in YA, and now you're publishing in non-YA. Was that a deliberate choice on your part, or did your editor just say like, "Oh, hey, this new manuscript isn't YA," so and did they tell you?
I think I went into writing the Temps knowing that it would be a jump. I did ultimately have to change agents as a part of this, and I don't know if he didn't fully resonate with the book in part because he was mostly focused on YA. But obviously it doesn't. It can entail some real shifts in what you have to do. Yeah, I think that for me, the needs of this story, I suppose I could have called it The Interns, and it was like a group of, teenage interns or something like that. But it just felt very much like a story about people who are technically adult, and the divisions between YA and adult fiction are pretty porous, as I think we've already established. But generally speaking, if you've got a protagonist that's 16, or you've got a protagonist that's 24, the market will kind of push you into one or the other based on whether they're a teen or not. And so that was a pretty easy classification. I think genre-wise, the more difficult question that I faced was not jumping YA to adult necessarily, but it was finding an editor who said, how come this horror or science fiction novel has so much stuff about office life in it? Or, how come this office coming of age satire is so scary in the first chapter, stuff like that. Because the genre question, even within like demographic categories, even within adult, like where do you shelve it? Is it horror? Is it science fiction? Is it literary? Is it mystery? Some people have been calling this a mystery. That can be really difficult. And I agree with Sarah that I like things that defy categorization, but you do have readers out there who are very accustomed to saying, okay, I read science fiction, I read literary, I read mystery, and like very straight applications of that genre. And then when they find something that's a little bit of a mix, they're not quite sure what to make of it. Like
Yeah.
the book, those defy categorization books that you're not sure where to put them in the bookstore, they kind of have to teach you how to read them, because each one has a different blend of the different genres that it's putting together. And I struggled with this even as a reader. I love the stuff that mixes things up, but sometimes it's not quite the exact mix that I would have wanted. It's a funny thing, but I do like genre blending that people are doing.
Absolutely. This is a little bit of an inside baseball follow-up, but as I said, I think a lot of our viewership is interested in sort of the writing and publishing process. How much of a role did your agent play in kind of pushing that through? I mean, did your agent sort of get out there and say, like, listen, this is not a mystery, this is this, and sort of really push it?
Sure.
Or did the publisher sort of, bequeath that on you guys and you had to live with it?
Ultimately, it was the publisher who saw the vision. And I mean, I'll just reveal, my agent at the time, he read it and he said, this is just a zombie novel and I can't sell a zombie novel. So he was having that genre problem where he was going at it with a very specific lens, and couldn't see kind of beyond that to what I was really trying to do. Ultimately, we parted company over it because I knew that he couldn't quite, like, the book needed someone to present it in the right way. And I ended up getting this book unagented. It got picked up off the slush pile at Turner when they briefly opened for open submissions from anybody.
Wow, great
Yeah.
story. That's great.
And I have another agent now, but not the same as before. And it just kind of happened in the gap between two agents that this all came together. So
Oh, that's a great writing story. That's awesome. And I mean,
yeah.
good for you, because I think like making that jump, giving up an agent when you have one is one of those things that writers sort of makes your blood run cold. So
It was scary, but you got to be with the people who see what you're doing and can see the value in it.
that's it.
So, yeah.
That's it. All right, Sarah, we're getting down into it. We're talking about selling books. So this is a question I oftentimes have for booksellers, which is, we don't know what books are going to sell. We were sort of talking before we came on air about how excited people are about the new Emily St. John Mandel novel that's out now, which can be purchased at Subtext, link in the chat. And it's a pretty good bet that that's going to be a book that sells well. But it's so unpredictable. What is going to take off, what's not going to take off. Things that people have high expectations for wind up disappearing. Things come out of nowhere and become hits. I guess my question for you is kind of two-part. One of them is, do you feel like you as a bookseller have some insight into that? Do you see these things coming? Or do you sort of have a sense of what's going to catch on? And number two, do you help to shape it? Do you help to kind of shape the tastes of the booksellers, or do you sort of feel like you're with the rest of us just trying to kind of chase the wave?
Yeah, I mean, that's again, a really hard question to succinctly answer because there is no good right answer for that. I'm not the main buyer at the store. That's Matt, the manager, and he's really good at figuring out the tastes of the store and the customers. But I think yeah, you can never really know. A super lauded book comes out and we sell a few copies, but it's not the wildfire that we thought it was going to be. Or vice versa, this really small indie book is coming out and it sells a ton of copies. And as a bookseller, we really do have some control in shaping that, I think, and that's part of the fun part. The fun part of my job is if I find, a book that's you're not getting on like, Reese Witherspoon's book club pick or whatever, but I think it's equally as phenomenal. I really have some control and power in hand selling that then into the customer and introducing that to more people than they might just see it on like a list or something online.
Hmm.
So that is a fun part where you can say that I really believe in that book. Let's bring multiple copies in here and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, it is just sort of, I don't want to say a crapshoot, but there is a lot of unknown to it sometimes, as much as as much as you know about what's going to happen, and as much as you can infer from the past and
Yeah.
previous tales and all that. We're up to fate sometimes.
Well, let's talk book covers. I mean, because this book has a fabulous cover. And I mean, Andrew, in just a second, I'm going to ask you about the cover. But Sarah, do you think that cover art plays a significant role in sales? I know that authors
Totally.
obsess about it. Yeah, tell us what you think.
Yeah. I mean, I think right now, like they definitely go in trends. Right now, it's the color blotches underneath like really clean typography, which is nice. Like that's why it's popular because it's a nice cover scheme. That's why I like the Temps because it actually is distinctive and you want to pick it up and know what's going on there. But yeah, as people say, don't judge a book by its cover, but the cover is really important.
Mhm.
And it really is interesting how it goes through trends. Just looking at the new fiction table, and you can just see like, oh, we're in the color blotches trend. Okay, cool. Let's see what's coming next.
I mean, it's a great cover on this one. Andrew, tell us about the cover. Tell us about the development of this cover.
Yeah. So Turner Keylight picked a cover designer who's fantastic. Her name is Lauren Peters Collier. She actually was the cover designer for Britt Bennett's The Vanishing Half,
Mhm.
as well as Patricia Lockwood's uh, No One Is it No One Is Talking About This, or Many People Are Talking About This?
No one is talking about
No one
this.
is talking about this. Okay, thank you. And so, I mean, they told me that that's who they had in mind. And I knew right away that, I was probably going to get a really good cover because she is fantastic. I looked at her portfolio. She gave us, several options. She read the book and then gave us several options. And then this was the winner. There were a couple of different color options with this, but I think probably like marketing and sales was the deciding vote. I mean, my feedback was solicited, and I did like this one a lot. But folks in marketing and sales really do like a cover that's going to stand out, and that bright green, I think they could not pass it by, because it turns out there aren't many green covers. Like I've been kind of paying attention to that now, and I don't see many of them.
Mhm.
So it definitely is distinctive. And I've been seeing people on Instagram saying like, "Oh yeah, that book with the green cover. I've been keeping my eye on that one." So covers definitely do make a great deal of difference.
Oh yeah, and I mean, it's so. I mean, people probably can't see it on the screen, but I mean, just the figures on it who are sort of in like business casual, but with a gas
With
mask on.
gas masks, it's great.
I mean,
It's
like
great.
clearly the artist had sort of like read the book, got the vibe of the book, and
Yep.
was like, it's just one of those pieces where like the art just completely meshes with what's actually happening in the book. So it's fabulous. Um,
Yeah, it's great.
so we're talking about visual art. Let's talk about music. So we're gonna post a link in the chat to your playlist for the Temps,
Yeah.
which is very cool. Which I had a chance to look at through Large Hearted Boy blog, and we'll put a link to that in the chat. Um, I've always kind of aspired to have book playlists for the books that I'm working on, and I can never quite put it together. Like sometimes I've got like one song, but I mean, what role does music play in your creative process?
Well, the I find it very difficult to listen to music while I write,
Right.
especially if it has words. And all of the music that's on the playlist is not something that I could listen to when I wrote.
Got it.
But I thought that like having a playlist on Large Hearted Boy was just kind of a aspiration of mine, because I just think it's cool to have a playlist. Some of the songs, I'm not sure if you got a chance to read my write up, but some of the songs actually appeared in the book in an initial um, an initial draft,
Mm-hmm.
but they were pulled out because, you know, if you include song lyrics, you need to get permission,
That's
and
it.
it's very complicated.
Yep.
But like the sort of like horrifying apocalypse scene in my first draft, what happened was the CEO gets on the stage at the all company meeting, and U2's The Streets Have No Name, Where the Streets Have No Name plays, because I thought that was the kind of music that a CEO might want it as his walk-on music.
Yeah.
But then like the music kept playing during the sort of like horrifying scenes that followed, so it was interspersed with like lyrics from Bono, which I thought at the time was just funny, and I was just goofing around. But then ultimately I took it out. But so
Yeah.
I mean, that was one thing where I was like, yeah, there was actually some music in here, I'll just put this on the playlist. But the other one was, I guess, just stuff that made me think thematically of the of the stuff that's in the book, music that kind of syncs up with the same themes. There are plenty of songs about the end of the world. I tried to stay away actually from the REM song because I thought it was probably just too cliche, like everybody would expect it. But I ended up putting up a lot of songs there that I listened to during this time of my life, you know, my 20s, which is probably when I was listening to the most music, the most new music, and actually like keeping up with music. So I had a lot of options, and it was just a fun thing to do, and it's a fun playlist. I think it's a lot of fun to listen to. Occasionally I'll work out to it lately, just because I think they're good songs.
They are good songs. It's a
Yeah.
great playlist. And yeah, the whole copyright thing is very funny. I had a manuscript at one point where one character sang Thunder Road to another character, and we knew the lyrics appeared. And my agent was like, look, you can say Bruce
Can't do it.
Springsteen, you can say Thunder Road. You can't actually have the lyrics for Thunder Road, or else
Right.
we've got to get in touch with Bruce's people, and it'll be a whole thing. I was like, oh, darn it.
I know. It'd be so nice.
I know, exactly, exactly. You also do nonfiction writing. We're going to link to your Substack Speakeasy in the chat. You've got a great piece on there recently about Station 11, which
Yeah.
is an interesting comp with your own work. Sarah, in a minute, I'm going to come to you to ask you about apocalyptic fiction and apocalyptic interest among readers. But Andrew, tell us a little bit about your Substack and about the, you toggle, it seems, between writing fiction and writing kind of cultural commentary.
Yeah.
Are these just sort of different parts of your brain that you activate at different times?
I think they are. Although, you know, having read the book like you did, you probably noticed that that at least this book, my approach can be in spots very essayistic. You know, the characters definitely have like serious thoughts about things.
Right.
So in that way, you know, I'm accessing, maybe it's a Venn diagram, and sometimes I'm accessing the same part of my brain. But you know, in the nonfiction writing, what I like to do is just have space for myself to write mostly about film, honestly, because every once in a while, like, it's just a passion of mine, and every once in a while I'll watch a movie or a TV show that just gives me that kind of like, I just really want to write about this. I have a take on this that I kind of want to bring to the world, and my approach on the Substack tends to be somewhat of a blend of cultural criticism and biography, or just kind of like looking at the place where the art actually spills over into some part of my life or in some part of life more broadly, which in general, you know, both as a writer, as a creator of art, and a consumer of art is something that fascinates me. Is like, obviously it's super fun to read books, to watch movies, to watch TV shows, whatever. But where do these stories actually touch on our lives and have an impact on us? Where are they reflecting things that are real about our experience? And that's what I usually try to write the sort of lens that I try to write out of.
Mhm.
Not as frequently as maybe I ought to, I'll be honest, on the Substack, but frequently enough, I hope.
Right, right. That's great. Sarah, Kimberly and I have been doing this show for almost 2 years. We've got our second anniversary episode coming up later this month. And, I feel like early in the process, booksellers, we would ask booksellers what people are reading, and initially it was like Moby Dick and War and Peace, because everybody was like, oh, I've got all this time, I'm sort of locked in, I sort of want to tackle this book, David Foster Wallace and whatever. And then at some point that I think that stopped a little bit, and people wanted sort of things that were more sort of comforting. Are people ready for apocalyptic fiction?
I think I mean, I am, but that's always the hardest part. I read lots of like more darker things. People come in like, I want a really happy book, and I have to like mentally flip through all the dark stuff I've been reading and try to find something happy and comforting in my
Right.
previous reads. But yeah, I think, I mean, it's interesting, right, to be reading about the apocalypse when we're sort of in one, some
Right.
could argue, and sort of what that does mentally. I feel like, at least personally, like I couldn't read about pandemics or anything in the very beginning, but now, not that we're past it, but somehow mentally there's been a bit of a breath that I can read books like that again.
Right.
And I think people are ready for that. Is that because we don't have a game book for what's going on? We sort of want to find those answers in fiction if we're looking for sort of, well, these people survived this poisonous gas by doing this, so maybe if that happened to me, I can do that too.
Right.
Or just sort of, playing out our worst fears on the page in the comfort of our home.
Yeah.
But I think it really, like, going to that extreme really lets us wrestle with these deep human things that we're trying to come to terms with in
Totally.
terms of humanity and death and all those big things.
Yeah, I mean,
But
we're exploring our fears. I think that's
mhm.
right. I mean, Andrew, apocalyptic question for you from the audience. Question from the audience, which is, how do you stay hopeful when you're writing about the end of the world? I don't want to give away things about the end of the book. I don't want to sort of say, is it a hopeful ending? I mean, you can say whatever you want, but I mean, I don't want to sort of frame it necessarily, but just, I mean, broadly speaking, I mean, like you share in your bio that you have young kids. You're looking at the world right now with, as you've commented in your nonfiction, multiple apocalyptic events going on that
Mhm.
concern the future of humanity. It's something that I think many people have a difficult time really looking at and thinking about. And you're spending many, many hours writing hundreds and hundreds of pages about it. How do you stay sane?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, and I think partly it touches on what different people come to art for, both in the creating and in the consuming. And I think that for me, the seeing my own fears reflected back to me is in some strange way a comfort, if only because if only as a maybe solace for loneliness, because you know I feel this way. Sometimes I feel like the world is ending, and sometimes if I am reading a work of fiction where it's obviously written out of kind of the same feeling, it's kind of like, okay, I'm not alone. Someone else lives with this as well and finds a way to deal with it. The characters are living with it. The author is probably living with it. And so, on some level, it's kind of, I wrote this out of the hope that I might reach some people who have those same feelings. Thank you, Trisha. And the other piece I think that is really important to acknowledge, and this is a major piece of the book, this is a theme of the book, that actually, and this is actually something that I want the audience to hear, the apocalypse is not the end of the world. And this initially comes out in the book through just kind of an analysis of the word apocalypse, which in its Greek root means an unveiling. Um, and I think that's true as well. It's not the end of the world. It's something that reveals the shape of what the world might be in the future. So the pandemic, it's not the end of the world. Here we still are. We're surviving the pandemic, but it revealed a world of radical connection, global connection, where microbes can cross borders and spread all over the world. A world where we have to be thinking about our connections with each other and our responsibility toward each other. So that's maybe more of a positive lens on it. It's not less scary, because apocalypses are scary. They're major upheavals that result in a lot of bad things. But if we look at them and look for the signs that they're giving us about what the world is evolving toward, then I think that we as individuals and as a human race, a human civilization, can work together to navigate them toward a better world. That is the hope, and that's the hope that I wrote the Temps toward.
That's fabulous. I love that, and that is hopeful. Um, we are running down on time. This has gone by very, very quickly, and I don't want to go without selling some books. So, to the audience, again, current and future audience, we're going to be dropping links to support Subtext Books in St. Paul, Minnesota. Click on the link, go through, buy books from that store, not from a big box, not from a large online retailer that is in some ways parodied very well on the Temps, but from Subtext. Obviously, you've got to pick up a copy of the Temps. Sarah, what else? What else should people be reading? What do you have to recommend?
Yeah, and I will say too, we are open for browsing. If you're local, come on in. We also offer shipping nationwide, so wherever you're tuning in from, we can get you your books. Let's see, I have a stack here, so bear with me.
Yeah.
But I just started the Unwritten book by Samantha Hunt. It's phenomenal. She wrote The Dark Dark, which is a novel. She does, again, that sort of dark, multi-genre sort of work, and it's phenomenal. Another one is When I Sing Mountains Dance by Rina Sola. It is set in a small village in the Pyrenees, and it sort of centers around this hunting accident. And as the residents of the village try to come to terms with that, but it's narrated from the people there, but also from the mountains, the lightning bolts, the mushrooms of the mountain. So it's a really holistic and atmospheric portrait of this town. It's beautiful writing. It's amazing. Please read it. And then on the post-apocalyptic vibe is My Volcano by John Elizabeth Dempsey. Part of the joy of this is not knowing what's going to happen. So I'll just say that a volcano erupts in Central Park. But does it really come into Central Park? Is it actually real? So it sort of flicks back into time, different timelines, wormholes. It's very trippy,
wow.
but in like the best way. It's really, really great.
Fabulous. Love those. Those are great recommendations. Thank you. Andrew, what are you reading?
Yeah, so I just started, and I'm going to hold up a phone because it's an audiobook, but Cultish, which many of your readers may have heard about, by Amanda Montell. As I said, I just started reading it. I think it's fantastic, analyzing the language of cults, and also applying thinking about cults to other social phenomenon like multi-level marketing schemes and like CrossFit and stuff like that. Honestly, it's giving me, I think that there's maybe some connections with the Temps, because some corporate cultures can be a little cultish. And since I showed an audiobook, I should mention that, and I think most people know this, but if you don't, Libro.fm is a service that you can support your audio habit, but also use that money to support any local independent bookseller like Subtext. Just a couple more. These are physical books. This book, In a Lonely Place by Dorothy Hughes. This is one of those New York Review books editions. A pretty old book, crime novel that's really scary and just like marvelously written. Became a movie starring Humphrey Bogart, but I really recommend the book. It's fantastic. I'm about halfway through. And then just a couple more, probably ones that most folks are familiar with, but Leave the World Behind by Rumaan Alam. This is a book that I just tend to mention in connection with the apocalypse or catastrophe genre, and I like it because, like my book, it's a catastrophe told through a very specific lens of just a couple people who don't really know what's going on within a confined atmosphere of a house in Long Island, I believe. Just a fantastic book, marvelously written by Rumaan Alam. And then since I came home and this was waiting for me from one of my lovely local booksellers. Sea of Tranquility, which we've been talking about, at least in passing, by Emily St. John Mandel, one of my most anticipated books of the year. And I'm going to rush through the books that I'm working on so that I can dive into this one. Really pumped
It's
about
so
it.
good.
Is it good?
It's
Good,
so
I'm glad.
good. Yeah.
Love it. So pick it up to the audience. Pick it up at Subtext. Sarah, we've arrived at our last question, which is always to the bookseller, and it's always a fill in the blank. Being an independent bookseller is part luck, part hard work, and part what else?
I mean, I was trying to think of like a funny answer, but I'm going to be sincere and say community.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's
I think that's what comes through in this show again and again, is sort of the importance of community to these bookstores, the importance of these bookstores to community, and I think it's a fabulous answer. So thank you. Thank you both so much for being here today. It's been a complete delight to speak with the two of you. Sarah Casavan of Subtext Books in St. Paul, Minnesota. To the audience, support Subtext. Click on one of the many, many links in the chat to pick up a copy of the Temps and any of the fabulous books that we've recommended. Andrew DeYoung, congratulations on the Temps. It's a fabulous book. Has just launched. So best wishes for all success with it, and thank you for being here with us today. To the audience, thank you for joining us. Current and future audience, thank you for joining us. Tune in next week. We have a Mighty Blaze's own Rachel Barenbaum, author of Atomic Anna, joining Trident Books in Boston. And mark your calendars because our 2-year anniversary show is coming up on April 27th. And we're going to be with singer, songwriter, and novelist Josh Ritter, along with his favorite independent bookstore. And it's going to be a great conversation. But until then, thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you to the audience. Everybody, please stay well and keep reading.